I like to imagine that most people have at least one piece of media that they have a strange obsession with, something that they can't quite understand how it entered their lives and why they care about it so much. My obsession happens to be this early PS2 game that I really only seem to care about. It's a survival horror game from 2001 called Extermination. I'm not quite sure why I have such an odd attachment with this game. I just do. My earliest experience was watching my dad play it when I was a kid. I must have been about like 3 or 4 years old, I think. But I like to attribute that experience of observing him playing this weird, obscure horror game being partially responsible for my taste in media. And now I currently own 1 complete box copy, 1 copy missing a manual, and 2 loose discs. Why? This game just has a lot in it that I could talk about for a while. Some good, some bad, some just really weird to know. It feels like a hella cult classic that people would hold near and dear to their hearts, but somehow it's barely even that. I've noticed that there's not a lot of coverage on this game outside of some Let's Plays and short reviews and even a couple recent speedruns. Even among the people that I watch that tend to cover horror games like this, nobody has really talked about Extermination, which is something that kinda shocked me. Fine, I'll do it myself. Let's take a look at Extermination for the PlayStation 2. I'm not sure people realize just how important Extermination is within the history of the PS2. When you ask someone who knows their survival horror stuff about the console, they'll probably bring up Silent Hill 2 and Fatal Frame and Siren at some point. All of them are really important games and deserve the recognition that they get, don't get it twisted. And yet, poor Extermination just watches from the sidelines, moping, looking at the crowd and saying to himself, "But I did it first." Indeed, Extermination predates Silent Hill 2, Fatal Frame, and the European-only port of Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare as the very first survival horror game released on the system. And yet it's just not remembered as well. Why? Well, the critical reception is likely one part of it. Apparently this game was used at trade shows as a showcase for the system's potential, and while it apparently generated some buzz from journalists and websites, it ended up receiving lukewarm reviews across the globe and faded into obscurity, where it would remain for the rest of its life, while its eventual peers would receive more praise and recognition. But you know what? Fuck that. I think this game is just neat, and I'll show you all why. Extermination was helmed by Capcom alumnus Tokuro Fujiwara, aka Professor F. A man that even Shinji Mikami cited as someone he can't compete with. Guys behind a lot of Capcom's hardest hitters: Ghosts and Goblins, Bionic Commando, Breath of Fire, Sweet Home, and in turn, Resident Goddamn Evil. Professor F helped put Capcom on the map, I'd say. He'd end up leaving the company in 1996 to establish Whoopee Camp, put out Tomba 1 and 2, and eventually go defunct because Tomba 1 and 2 didn't sell. However, in 1998, Fujiwara also founded Deep Space, another company closely working with Sony, and would eventually release Extermination in 2001, along with a Japanese-exclusive first-person adventure game called Hungry Ghosts in 2003, which looks really cool, and I want to play it, and then Deep Space went defunct because Extermination and Hungry Ghosts didn't sell. Fujiwara became more hands-off from the games industry since. After Hungry Ghosts, he's only been cited working on 4 games from 2003 to 2021. He only recently directed Ghosts and Goblins Resurrection, which was released earlier this year. It's a shame his career just kinda flopped since he left Capcom, because he creates and produces some really cool looking games. And on a related note, Extermination. You play as Sergeant Dennis Riley, an upstanding American lad who loves his motorcycle and jumping crevices.
I have to jump that crevice.
He's part of the US Marines Special Forces Recon Team Red Light, good lord that's a mouthful, alongside his best buddy Roger Grigman. He's from New York.
Fuck your life! Bing bong!
You and the boys are on your way to Fort Stewart, a secret government facility in Antarctica that sent out a distress signal a couple days prior and has been unresponsive since. The job is to get in, make sure everything's okay, find any survivors, and get out. But, oh no! Your plane inexplicably blows up, and now everyone's split up except for you and Roger. The two of you infiltrate through a ventilation system, which seems like a massive security flaw, but hey, nothing bad could happen, right?
I can't believe this.
Oh. Since Dennis is a big, tough American military boy, you're gonna be doing a lot of moving and a lot of shooting. You'll notice right away that there are no tank controls to be found here. It's all free movement. However, Dennis has this weight to his step. Once you start running, it takes a moment for Denny Boy to reach his full speed, and as soon as you stop running, he has to slow himself down before he stops in place. He'll also curve just a little bit when making sharp turns, and if you go forward and immediately push the analog stick down, he'll turn around and skid a little before he runs again. So if you want to reliably make precise movements, you're gonna want to tread carefully. For the most part, I kinda like this semi-grounded movement. It gives you more freedom than traditional tank controls would, but at the same time it's just cumbersome enough to make you think about when to walk and when to run, where you should turn, and how to position yourself. This also ties in with another mechanic that Extermination heavily advertised. In some interviews, Professor F has stated that he wanted this game to feel like an action movie, where you have to make split-second choices in tense situations, and to fulfill this gameplay desire, he came up with a most revolutionary system.
With the Region Action system, you control the character's movement with just one button. For example, when you need to jump, hitting the action button will make you jump. If you need to climb, just hit the same button.
Now, I know what you're thinking. Sage, that's just an action button. This isn't anything. And you'd be right. But I still want to talk about it. So, the X button on your controller is basically one big do button. Opening doors, press X. Picking up items, press X. You have to jump that crevice, press X. And during certain sequences or with certain enemies, you can also dodge roll by pressing X. You can do a lot with this button, and in a way it does streamline things. But it's also not perfect. Say you want to pick up an item, so you run up to it and you press X. However, the item is placed close to a ledge. If you are not directly in front of the item and still running, Dennis will Olympic long jump his ass off the ledge and towards what waits below. Because the button does everything, there will be times where it does the opposite of what you want. Yeah, I'm not expecting most people to vibe with this kind of movement system, but like how some people consider tank controls to add to a tense situation, I think that this movement system works just as well. A lot of the level design consists of these smaller rooms and corridors that force you into close encounters with enemies without a lot of wiggle room, and when the rooms are bigger, they're typically divided into smaller subsections that still force you to make do with the area you're given. It's claustrophobic on occasion. Sometimes a whole area will be on fire, making the room itself seem big, but still limiting where you can actually move. Or maybe the lights are out, forcing you to use the flashlight on your gun to see what's ahead of you, but since you need to aim your gun to use the flashlight, it leaves you open to attack. I wouldn't exactly say it ever makes the game feel scary, but having to move around in tight spaces filled with upwards of 4 or 5 different enemies getting in your face does force you to play defensively. Which brings me to combat. Since Extermination rests on the action side of the survival horror scale, you're gonna be fighting a lot of gross monsters and mutants. The interesting thing is, your arsenal is seemingly rather limited. Throughout the entire game, Dennis only has 2 actual weapons, a knife and an assault rifle. However, these 2 weapons are actually pretty good. The knife is deceptively strong. You could do a 3-hit combo with the circle button or a strong upward sweep with square. The knife can break padlocks, boxes, and other obstacles, and it can reliably kill smaller enemies, thus saving you precious ammo for your rifle. However, this rifle isn't just a rifle, it's the ultimate rifle. Dennis is equipped with an SPR4, which is basically a cracked out M4 carbine. By holding down R1 or R2, Dennis will stand still and enter a third person or first person aiming stance respectively. Aiming in third person will automatically lock onto enemies near the laser sight and gives you greater situational awareness, but aiming in first person lets you aim freely, giving you a chance to snipe from a distance or go for enemy weak points if they're vulnerable. You'll be using both methods pretty frequently. They're surprisingly balanced. But there is one big flaw. Vertical aiming is inverted and there is no option to change it, which is really stupid. Yeah, I mean, I got used to it, but I still want the option to uninvert the camera. Shit sucks. Okay, sure, it's a rifle, but what actually makes this thing special? Well, you see, you can change your life to better suit your mood by collecting parts to customize your gun. You start with a tactical light and a dot sight and one firing mode. It says you have two, but this one doesn't exist. Don't worry, it's fine because I could just shove a whole ass shotgun under the barrel. Apart from other scopes and functions, you'll be finding plenty of secondary weapons that you can use with the square button. There's a shotgun, a flamethrower, a grenade launcher, and a special weapon that's scattered in 3 parts across the facility. It is really funny to just have a whole fucking shotgun attached to your gun, but the customization really is kind of neat. My only complaint is that I wish there were more parts to use, but the ones you do get each have their uses. Every weapon has their own ammo type, and since most enemies are aggro as hell and sometimes a bit tanky, the game will be giving you a decent amount of it. It encourages you to use your weapons against the tougher freaks whenever you can, but ammo is still scarce enough to make you think about when you need to use it. Mostly. You can run out of ammo for your sub-weapons, but the rifle itself is a slightly different story. It does have a limited supply of ammo, but throughout the facility are these ammo restocking stations that will instantly fill your magazines back up to the max, so even when you're out of bullets, you're never out of bullets, you know? You can also find spare magazines for the SPR4 scattered around the place, which further increases your maximum ammo capacity. This is balanced out by making groups of enemies more frequent threats. Even the weakest monsters take 3 bullets to kill, but many rooms will have plenty of those paired with even bigger monsters to worry about, so unless you're very conservative and swear by the honor of the blade, you'll be burning through more bullets than you realize. Honestly, this is kind of genius. The game effectively gives you unlimited ammo, but it can still generate situations where you run out of it if you're still trigger happy. Why are you guys brushing this game aside again? It's Kino! Who designed this game again? Okay, now I know y'all are missing out.
Taylor, where are you? Taylor! Taylor!
I am of the belief that if you want to make a game with atmosphere, then you'll need some pretty good music and sound design in it, especially if you're making a horror game. Silent Hill and Fatal Frame wouldn't be nearly as iconic if the sound took a back seat. Otherwise, you'd just get The Ring Terror's Realm, which, do I really need to elaborate any further than that? Extermination, despite being made as more of an action romp, still has some really nice sounds to it. The game makes extensive use of reverb, with each room you enter having a very noticeable tone to it. Some areas are relatively flat without a lot of reflection when a sound hits, but others get downright cavernous with their echoing.
So, this is the water filtration plant. That must be the water reserve.
This approach truly makes everything feel desolate and apocalyptic. Every footstep feels lonely and isolated, every gunshot clearly ringing with a palpable punch. And when you're surrounded by enemies, the groans and hisses and roars they make are only amplified and made all the more intimidating by this game's powerful reverb. It even extends to the menus. Every sound effect is rather metallic, somewhat harsh, with long decay and release times only further extended with a very dense, diffused reverb that accents the high frequencies. I just like how this feels, you know? The sound design only elevates the sense of isolation and tense mystery throughout the whole facility. It's cold, artificial, but with a faint organic element that turns it into something more. The music's also pretty good. Won't be winning any awards at all, but for a soundtrack made to fit a game like this, it's got enough diversity to keep your interest. Most of the score is orchestral in tone, like a lot of Hollywood action movies are. You'll be hearing a lot of booming bass drums, sharp brass instruments, and plenty of strings to amp the tension up and make those epic moments feel epic. But it's not just your typical James Bond soundtrack either. There is a bit more happening here. Composer Motoki Funiyama, whom I can't really find much on. I'm guessing this is the guy here, but I'm not really seeing much credit to Extermination anywhere I can see, so we'll just say this is the guy for now. He makes extensive use of synthesizers and ambient sounds when needed, even in some of the more orchestral tracks. Some of these pads and plucks are downright icy, which I'm certain was intentional. Faint arpeggiated notes and staccato clicks panning around you when things get tense add extra character when needed, and hell, there's even a few moments where there's some spicy lead guitar riffs added for extra bite. Man, this is just one perfectly fitting score. I can't imagine this being anything else, really. Only issue I can see is that the music stops and repeats from the start every time you exit a menu or enter a room, so some tracks might get a bit grating, but that's no slight against the actual music, so hell yeah, Funiyama. Hell yeah. Once Dennis and Roger somehow avoid shattering all their bones upon entering the facility, they quickly come to realize that this place is kinda fucked. Everything's in disarray, there's fire everywhere, and no signs of life to be found. Whatever's happened here has spiraled well past being able to control. And then the first enemy is just kinda revealed without any fanfare or reaction from crevice jumping Dennis. Like, wow, a freak of nature. Despite the anticlimactic reveal of your first threat, I think these are probably some of my favorite enemies in a horror game, at the very least design-wise. There's just something inherently gross and unnerving about these things. Whatever's spreading in this place has turned what were most likely cockroaches into an entomophobe's worst nightmare. They come in groups, making shrill hissing and screeching sounds, flying towards you and spitting a foul green sludge. And if one of them manages to latch onto you, oh dear. Yes, out of all the video games I can think of that have to deal with outbreaks and infections, this is one of two that actually has an infection mechanic. The other one is literally called Outbreak, but I digress. The plague spreading throughout Fort Stewart is a bacteria called HO213. It's highly aggressive and infectious, to the point where it can form these moist, fleshy patches of organic matter that spreads onto most surfaces. Living things infected by it are deformed and twisted, covered in veins and swollen red flesh. Rib cages and orifices will split open and reveal a glowing core that acts like a nucleus to the infested organism, wresting all control away from its host. Worse yet, it loves water. Water with HO213 spreading inside of it effectively becomes a living thing in itself, and creatures that ingest enough water will undergo rapid evolution. This thing is nasty in every sense of the word. So, while you have to worry about your health, you also need to worry about how infected Dennis is. A lot of enemy attacks and some obstacles will inflict a varying percentage of infection depending on what hit you. You can tell how infected Dennis is by looking at the pause menu, where you can see the exact percentage along with some flavor text from his perspective. Infection is actually not too bad as long as you stay under 100%. Most attacks that raise your infection percentage typically don't inflict damage and have a long windup, and even if you do get spat on like the naughty marine you are, there are no negative effects to partial infection, and you can reduce your infection rate by using booster shot items. But if you're too careless and get fully infected, start panicking. Once you hit 100% infection, one of those cores will burst out of Dennis's back. And then the scary music kicks in. As long as you're infected, your maximum health is capped at 60 and will slowly degrade over time. And if you so much as get a single drop of water on you, Dennis will keel over and take some extra damage. In a game where enemies are highly aggressive and can deal as much as 30 points of damage, getting fully infected is not only extremely punishing, but it's also completely on you considering how easy it is to avoid it. Also, those booster shots I mentioned, they ain't helping you anymore. If you want to get rid of the infection before it gets rid of you, then you'll need to move your ass over to the nearest treatment bed and jam a vaccine in there to completely recover your health and be cured. Only problem is, there's roughly 4 or 5 beds throughout the whole facility, so you better hope you're not too far away from one, or else Dennis will have to walk around with one of those IV poles with the amount of healing items you'll be using. But again, it's pretty easy to avoid catching what's going around if you're vigilant. What I'm really trying to say is, keep your distance from people and get vaccinated. Topical! Fuck yes! Okay, so now's probably a good time to address the massive European elephant in the room. Viewers from the PAL region that have been watching this and are somehow familiar with this game, you may be asking yourself,
Sage, I don't understand this 60 Hz business, and it scares me, and I want to know why everything else is also wrong.
And I bring you a simple one-word answer. Because. So for whatever reason, the NTSC region of Extermination has some very notable differences when compared to the PAL and Japanese versions. You know what that means! Yeah, I don't have the money for imports, and I'm using an emulator anyway, so who cares? One of the biggest changes over here is that every member of Red Light has a completely redesigned uniform. In the US release, these suits, which by the way are called Ultimate Suits in universe, just thought that would be fun to mention, they have this gray and white digital camouflage pattern, while in the Japanese and PAL versions, it's all black. The most notable change, however, is to Dennis himself. For some reason, they made him slightly bulkier and let his hair grow out over in America. I vaguely remember reading some article on this game when I was a kid that said something to the degree of, oh, we made Dennis bigger and stuff to appeal more to the Americans or something, but I couldn't find anything on that now. There's a good chance it was probably lost to the sands of time along with a lot of stuff from that era. Although, yeah, I do prefer the design that we got. The brighter suit fits better with the Arctic environment, which makes sense considering it was canonically made for this type of climate. And I don't know, I just like the long hair. It looks nice. But the other big difference between us and Europe is that both have completely different localizations and voice actors. Yeah. Don't see that every day, huh? According to the Cutting Room Floor, my favorite place on the internet, the PAL localization is a bit more literal to the Japanese script, while the US localization is hammed up a bit, which, yeah, I can kinda see it, although it's still not a huge difference. The separate dubs will be a bit more divisive, though. I grew up on this game, so I am absolutely a bit biased, but I gotta say, if you think the US voice acting is cheesy, wait until you get a big fat earful of these cutscenes.
Hey, wait! Who are you? What happened here? Tell me! Damn it!
Hey, wait! What the hell are you talking about? What happened here? Tell me! Damn it.
Ooh, yeah, that's bad. More, please.
I like it.
I imagine/hope that these voice actors did the best they could, but man, a lot of these performances just feel kind of flat. Dennis here just sounds like a bootleg Dan Southworth suffering from a lack of morning coffee.
I would have been chop suey, right? Yada yada yada. I've heard it all before.
Say what you will about American Dennis, but I feel he could emote a bit better.
Thanks.
I also have a feeling that when Roger's European voice actor was taken into the booth, the directors just told him, be a New Yorker, and he just kind of rolled with it. You can kind of hear it in American Roger's voice, but this is just absurdly amazing.
But just remember one thing. Be strong. That's all.
But just remember one thing. Be strong. You know?
It doesn't help that the audio mixing during cutscenes is also a bit weird. Some characters, typically Dennis, will be speaking really quietly while the music just blares over them, making it slightly illegible.
Have you found out anything new about this place?
Yes, there seems to be some connection between the water and those monsters.
The water, you say? We'll have to investigate that.
This especially sucks because this version just doesn't have subtitles for whatever reason. I couldn't find an option for them at least. And there is one particular cutscene that I'd like to draw attention to real quick. As soon as the music stops in this cutscene with these two characters, Cindy and Sonia, you can faintly hear voices talking in the background whenever Sonia speaks.
As long as you're trying to forget, you won't be forgetting at all. You don't have to forget. You don't even have to forgive.
My guess is that the voice actress was watching the cutscene from the booth, but the microphone just happened to be picking up the Japanese dialogue while recording. I have no clue how the audio team managed to miss that, but I think it's kind of a neat oversight. Those are the biggest differences between versions, although I did pick up on a couple of interesting curiosities. If you notice that everything sounded a bit slow when I played some of those PAL cutscenes, I'm honestly not sure myself. The reasonable answer would be that something happened while playing this game on the 50Hz standard voltage that is commonplace in Europe, but apparently that's not the case according to some people. And no, this isn't an emulator thing either. It just sounds like this. I don't know, man.
I should be able to jump from the carriage to the container.
But here's a detail that really caught my attention. In the US version, you start with 2 magazines for your SPR4. Every magazine holds 30 rounds, so you start the game with 60 rounds to fire. In the PAL version, you still start with 2 magazines, but they upped the capacity from 30 to 50. That's almost double. I immediately wondered why this was the case, so as soon as I found the first enemy, I fired off 3 shots. And my hypothesis was immediately confirmed. The PAL version of Extermination uses enemy health values from Extra Mode. Let me explain. In the game, there are these collectible dog tags that you find scattered around the facility. There's 15 in total, and if you find them all, you can load your cleared save file and replay the game with extra items and ammunition. If you find all of the dog tags and pick up another important item, you'll also start the game with the 6-round grenade launcher attachment. The trade-off is that enemies have had their health values increased, with these enemies, which are called Hydras by the way, notably taking 6 shots to kill instead of 3 in a normal playthrough. I immediately added the Japanese version to my library to see what it was like, and more differences. Yeah, magazines hold 50 rounds here too. But the real question is, how many bullets does it take to make a Hydra melt? Let's find out. 3. Okay, so enemies have normal health here. Weird. But wait, hold on. There isn't meant to be a health pack here. Wait, why is there an item up here? Flamethrower ammo? This early? Oh my god, they just toss items at you in this version like the US government tosses money into the military budget. Look, perfect example. In the US version, as soon as I got the first keycard and met this dude, don't worry about him, he doesn't matter. I had 7 magazines for my rifle, which gave me 210 rounds to fire. And I missed 1 magazine that I couldn't go back to get, so I could have had 240 rounds. At roughly that same point in the Japanese version, grabbing everything I could find, I had 11 magazines, 550 bullets. For further context, I would have had 11 magazines in the US release about 4.5 hours into this 6-hour game, but I only had 10 because, again, I missed 1. I had 11 magazines within hour 1 of playing the Japanese version. Ugh, man, I need to stop myself or else this is just gonna become a region comparison video. Hey, we are now officially in spoiler territory. I was debating on talking about the story at all, but to hell with it. I'm basically making the most comprehensive video on this dumb piece of media that this hell website will ever see. What's another few minutes added to the runtime? But if you want to play this game for yourself as fresh as can be, skip to this time code for my final thoughts. Here, I'll even play a funny video for you while I wait.
Hi.
Scrappy. Scrappy. Scrappy baby, 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 Scrappy baby, baby. I love you.
Okay, moving on. Fort Stewart was being used to conduct experiments on the HO-213, which originated from an alien meteor-like object known as the Origin that crash-landed some 60,000 years ago. It was originally used to study aviation during the late 1800s to try and replicate its flight pattern, resulting in the first unmanned prototype test flight in 1908, only for it to suddenly explode over Tunguska. Yes, I'm being serious. Years later, on July 5th, 1947, the first manned Origin prototype started its test flight, only to crash in Roswell, New Mexico. Yes, I'm being serious. The pilot inside was found horribly mutated, and HO-213 was recovered from his body in an incomplete state. The aviation program was halted in favor of studying the bacteria, so 2 Origin specimens were transferred to Fort Stewart: Origin Alpha in an underground nuclear testing site, Origin Beta in the research lab above ground. One researcher working with Origin Beta since at least 1990, one Jan Falcon, developed an obsessed reverence with HO-213, claiming it to be his son. He's since worked tirelessly on studying it, devoting his life to it over a decade. In 1998, the US Department of Defense decided to destroy all of the research in the underground facility and everything within using a nuclear device to prevent any leaked information, using a cover story to hide what actually happened. Ground facility workers were ordered to continue their research, however, and Falcon became the head researcher on Origin and HO-213. Now, in 2005, the bacteria breached containment and overtook the facility, which resulted in Red Light being called in to investigate. After infiltrating, Roger gets infected in front of Dennis, only to get shot down by a masked researcher. This is Cindy, a microbiologist with a strained relationship towards Dennis. She's distant towards him because one of his former teammates, who also happened to be Cindy's boyfriend, was killed in action during a battle in Cambodia, and Dennis had to break the news. She helps our hero despite that, and he eventually reunites with the remaining team members: Major Madigan, Philel, and this dude named McDonnell. He dies later. The Major explains that there are 3 detonators throughout the facility that need to be armed manually so they can blow the compound up. 2 in the lab areas and 1 in the power reactor. Philel and the Major take a helicopter over to the power reactor while Dennis goes to find the detonators in the labs. Along the way, we meet Gary, our token black character and demolitions expert. He's alive, but wounded. He eventually manages to make it to the infirmary where Cindy is, helping Dennis arm both detonators by unlocking the labs. After he returns to the infirmary, Cindy learns that the power reactor's core is heating up and being flooded with water infested with HO-213. Since it rapidly spreads throughout water and a climate with enough heat will further increase its ability to multiply, the area will effectively become a breeding ground for it. Dennis goes to the area he fell into with Roger to take a train over to the power reactor, fighting our first boss in the process. It's pretty simple once you find its attack patterns. Just run around while it tries to give Dennis the big smacky, and don't stand next to it too long or else it'll spew infectious gas at you. Once he reaches the power reactor, Dennis finds Philil bleeding to death behind some crates, claiming that the Major shot him. A few minutes later, we find the Major, who tells us that there's a bomb that Gary made in the wrecked C-17 plane they could use to attach to the reactor's coolant tank. But after Dennis grabs it, the Major heads up to the reactor's entrance, only to be severely injured. Right on top of the reactor, we find Roger, still alive and significantly more mutated.
You told me to be strong. I believed in those words, but what matters most is that I believed in you. What I want to know is how come a tough guy like you let some bacteria eat him for lunch? Was that all a lie? Answer me, Roger.
Dennis.
This is our second boss fight, and just a pro tip, Don't try to fight him from a distance. His ranged attacks are too frequent to put up with. Get onto the platform that he's on, kite around him whenever he tries to use his knife, and shoot him while he's recovering. His melee attacks do a lot of damage, but they're very easy to dodge. Once we finally put our old friend out of his misery, Dennis hands the bomb over to Major Madigan, who reveals that Falil was an undercover CIA agent sent to sabotage the plane, retrieve a sample of HO213, and escape as the lone survivor from Red Light. Madigan was ordered to destroy the bacteria and the facility, but some high-ranking government officials want to use it for their advantage. He gives Dennis a DVD that contains a code to enter the area where the fourth and final detonator is located, but before he sacrifices himself, he gives Dennis a promotion.
You inherit my legacy. You're now the leader of Team Red Light. That's a promotion, Dennis.
This whole stretch from fighting the first boss to killing Roger is probably the peak of this game to me. It feels like this is the point where the story really starts to unfold and show just how weird and well thought out the lore is here. I do wish we actually had more time with Roger to make his boss fight a bit more impactful in a story sense, but it's still a really nice set piece paired with my favorite song from the game. As Dennis escapes from the exploding power reactor via zipline, Gary talks to Cindy about her boyfriend Andrew's death, sharing his and the team's perspective on losing him, as nobody was even able to retrieve his body during combat. Dennis had to carry the weight of his friend's death on his shoulders, and now he has to save the world from a plague that can end all life on Earth. Dennis re-enters the ground facility and hands Cindy the DVD, where the truth unfolds. After apparently destroying the underground facility and Origin Alpha with it, the Department of Defense, and potentially a larger part of the US government, began planning Project Extermination, an experiment to test HO213's destructive capabilities and infectious potential, likely to use it as a bioweapon against foreign enemies and secure their position as the world's #1 superpower. This involved planting infected specimens in the facility's water filtration plant, observing the infestation process from there, and then sending Team Red Light to Fort Stewart with the intention of everyone there being killed or infected. Upset at this revelation, Dennis heads to the maximum security area to arm the final detonator and end this nightmare once and for all. However, upon arriving to arm the detonator, Dr. Falcon emerges with a gun pointed directly at Dennis, declaring that he has all the data he needs and won't be needing him anymore. However, the Origin encased in a tank suddenly starts reacting, causing an earthquake that makes something fall onto Falcon and electrocute him, giving Dennis the opportunity to activate the final detonator and begin his escape. Cindy and Gary are waiting on an LCAC hovercraft at a military dock, and after fighting through various mutated creatures, he arrives and the trio escape the facility before it all blows up. But as they escape, the awakened Origin breaks free from its containment pod, collects Falcon's corpse, and swims toward the hovercraft, intent on destroying the remaining survivors and putting humanity on the endangered species list. This is our final boss, and it is a doozy. The Origin starts as a massive shrimp-like creature, diving in and out of the ocean to attack Dennis using these fleshy, sludgy projectiles that can damage and infect you on impact and spawn evolved hydras. However, you can use a mounted cannon and a turret to fend the Origin off, but suddenly, after dealing enough damage, it mutates into a massive bipedal monster and jumps onto the ship, destroying the cannon in the process. This second phase is a bit of a pain because this thing takes up most of the space on the hovercraft, forcing you to be mobile and use the high ground whenever you can. But don't use it too much because it'll fire fucking grenades out of its sides and continue to attack you with those infectious projectiles. Not to mention, you're still juggling with stage 2 hydras, which will swarm around you whenever they can. However, if you've been collecting the rockets scattered around the facility and assembled the rocket launcher, I would start using that here. But once you defeat the Origin, it's still not done with you. Some of its biomass coalesces into a fleshy doppelganger of Dennis, SPR4 and all. Origin Dennis is pretty tanky, but he doesn't do much other than wildly shoot at you. You are able to hop onto the right-hand side of the LCAC and land shots on him there. Use your remaining rockets or grenades on him from up here and aim for the core. But be careful, as he can still shoot your explosives down, and you still have to deal with infectious projectiles and some hydras. After you defeat your own clone, the Origin is finally dead, and seemingly the rest of the HO-213 with it, as the Origin acts as a sort of hive mind. Dennis and Cindy reconcile, and Gary is still alive.
Hey, I'm invincible! Tough guys like me don't go down easy, you know?
He just got his leg caught in a rope after being tossed overboard and presumably just dangled from it all throughout that boss fight. Props to Extermination for actually keeping the Black and Asian American characters alive by the end, though. Anyways, Cindy apologizes for being so distant and cold to Dennis after Andrew's death, and the three sail away into the sunset, with hope that humanity will survive. Yeah, it's definitely a bit cheesy, but I can't say this isn't a satisfying ending to such a wild ride. For a game that'll take you 6 hours to beat, Extermination is pretty well paced and includes enough interesting ideas and plot beats to keep someone like me engaged. Then again, this is me we're talking about. I could probably find something nice to say about watching paint dry, and I mean that. Partially, at least. For a game that falls by the wayside compared to its more beloved brethren, Extermination still holds merit and value to this day as an ambitious and unique game in a generation full of ambitious and unique games. Yeah, it's clunky and a bit frustrating, and it's got some voice acting that varies from stupid to stupidly amazing, but again, that was a lot of games from the time. I'm absolutely biased here, but there's just a lot happening here. From the gameplay, its shockingly in-depth lore, and the weird regional differences that, again, I could probably make a whole video about. I do feel bad that this game never received the audience it was hoping to get, though. Allegedly, Sony and Deep Space were hoping this would be successful enough to warrant a franchise like Resident Evil and Silent Hill did, but unfortunately, that never came to pass. There was apparently a rumor that a sequel for the PS3 titled Extermination World Plague was greenlit in 2004 and being developed by Factor 5, the studio responsible for But then they closed down, taking any hopes of an Extermination sequel with it. I do wish we could have seen something from what this alleged game could have been, but the first game ends conclusively enough, so I can't complain too much. But hey, in an era full of remakes and franchise revivals, why not bring Extermination back? Survival horror has evolved significantly over the past 2 decades. There's a lot you could do with this game to bring it into the modern age. Hell, I'll fucking do it if I have to. I've never made a game in my life, but I'll still do it. I could at least do music and sound design for it, and that's it. I have officially given this game the coverage it deserves. Really, I guess this is the peak of my relationship with it. Feels kind of fulfilling, in a way. Like, maybe this stupid video about some dumbass deer rambling about something he likes could help bring some deserved attention to this thing. Wishful thinking, sure, but I can only imagine. For now, though, I think it's time to stop. Wait a minute. Go back to that opening cutscene again? Oh my god, guys! It's a Christmas game! This was the SageMustDie holiday special all along! Merry fucking holidays! The plague spreading throughout. The plague spread. Fuck me.